King Edmund sat in the oak-paneled study of Raven's Hollow Castle, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he held the damning documents before him. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Persian carpet, but the warmth did little to ease the chill that had settled deep in his bones. For 43 years, he had worn the crown of Valdoria with dignity and honor, weathering political storms, economic crises, and personal tragedies. Yet nothing had prepared him for this moment of ultimate betrayal. The papers bore the royal seal and contained evidence so devastating that Edmund had to read them 3 times before the full weight of their contents sank in. Queen Consort Isabella, the woman he had married 15 years ago amid great celebration and hope for the future, had been systematically working against the crown. The intelligence reports, bank statements, and encrypted communications painted a picture of treachery so profound that it shook the very foundations of everything Edmund believed about love, loyalty, and trust. Isabella had not simply been unfaithful in the traditional sense. Her betrayal ran far deeper than romantic infidelity. She had been feeding sensitive state information to foreign agents, manipulating trade agreements to benefit her secret business interests, and most shocking of all, had been coordinating with separatist groups within Valdoria's northern provinces. The evidence showed that she had been planning to use her position to gradually weaken the monarchy from within, ultimately seeking to establish herself as the head of a new Republican government. The king's private secretary, Lord Ashworth, stood silently near the fireplace, his usually composed demeanor betraying the gravity of the situation. He had been the one to bring these revelations to Edmund's attention, having spent months carefully investigating suspicious activities that had initially seemed like minor protocol violations. What began as concerns about Isabella's frequent private meetings and unexplained absences had evolved into a comprehensive investigation that revealed the scope of her deception. Edmund remembered the day he first met Isabella at a diplomatic reception in the neighboring kingdom of Astoria. She had been radiant, intelligent, and seemingly devoted to charitable causes. Her background as the daughter of a respected diplomat had made her an ideal candidate for queen consort, and their courtship had been a whirlwind of romantic gestures and shared visions for Valdoria's future. The public had embraced her warmly, charmed by her grace and her apparent dedication to her adopted country. The early years of their marriage had been marked by public success and private contentment. Isabella had thrown herself into her royal duties with apparent enthusiasm, championing education reform and environmental conservation. She had accompanied Edmund on state visits, hosted foreign dignitaries with aplomb, and seemed to genuinely care about the welfare of Valdoria's citizens. Her approval ratings had consistently exceeded even Edmund's own, making her betrayal all the more devastating. As Edmund continued to review the evidence, he realized that Isabella's charitable work had been a carefully constructed facade. The environmental foundation she had established was being used to launder money from foreign sources, and her education initiatives were actually serving as cover for meetings with subversive elements. Even their most intimate moments together now seemed tainted by the knowledge that she had been calculating and manipulating him throughout their entire relationship. The investigation had revealed that Isabella's treachery began almost immediately after their wedding. Phone intercepts showed her making coded calls to unknown contacts within weeks of becoming queen consort. Financial records indicated that she had been receiving substantial payments from sources linked to Valdoria's political enemies. Most damaging of all were the recorded conversations in which she expressed contempt for the monarchy and outlined her long-term plans to dismantle the institution from within. Lord Ashworth cleared his throat gently, reminding Edmund of the decisions that needed to be made. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable, but the political implications were staggering. Isabella remained popular with the public, who had no knowledge of her secret activities. Any action against her would need to be handled with extreme care to prevent widespread civil unrest and maintain the stability of the realm. Edmund set the documents aside and walked to the tall windows overlooking the castle grounds. In the distance, he could see the capital city of Valdoria, its spires and rooftops stretching toward the horizon. This was the kingdom he had sworn to protect and serve, the legacy of his ancestors that he was duty-bound to preserve for future generations. Isabella's betrayal was not just a personal wound, it was an attack on the very essence of everything he held sacred. The king knew that swift and decisive action was required, but he also understood the delicate nature of the situation. Isabella's removal from her position needed to be legally sound and politically justifiable. More importantly, It needed to be done in a way that would prevent her from causing further damage to the crown or the country. The evidence suggested that her network of conspirators extended far beyond what had been uncovered, making her continued presence in the royal household a serious security threat. As the sun began to set, casting the study in deepening shadows, Edmund made his decision. He would sign the papers that would strip Isabella of her royal privileges, her titles, and her access to state secrets. It would be a public humiliation for her and a personal tragedy for him, but it was the only way to protect Valdoria from further harm. The woman he had loved and trusted had chosen to betray not just him, but the entire nation they had sworn to serve together. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, matching the somber mood that had settled over Ravenshollow Castle. King Edmund had spent a sleepless night wrestling with the implications of his decision, but his resolve had only strengthened with the passage of time. The evidence of Queen Consort Isabella's betrayal was too damning to ignore, and the security of the realm took precedence over personal feelings, no matter how deep or painful they might be. Isabella had left the castle the previous evening to attend what she claimed was a charity gala in the capital, but intelligence reports now indicated that she was actually meeting with her foreign contacts to coordinate the next phase of her subversive activities. Her absence provided Edmund with the perfect opportunity to implement the measures necessary to neutralize her threat without risking a direct confrontation that could escalate into a more serious crisis. Lord Ashworth had worked through the night with a select team of trusted advisors to prepare the legal documents that would formally strip Isabella of her royal status and privileges. The papers were comprehensive and carefully crafted to withstand any legal challenges while providing clear justification for the extreme measures being taken. Every aspect of Isabella's official position would be revoked, from her ceremonial titles to her access to royal residences and state functions. The King's legal counsel, Sir Reginald Thornbury, had emphasized the unprecedented nature of these actions. Never before in Valdoria's history had a queen consort been stripped of her privileges for treason, making this a landmark case that would set important precedents for future monarchs. The legal framework existed to handle such situations, but it had never been tested in such dramatic circumstances. Edmund reviewed the documents one final time, noting the precise legal language that would effectively erase Isabella from the royal family. Her name would be removed from official records, her portraits would be taken down from public buildings, and her personal effects would be secured as potential evidence in any future criminal proceedings. Most significantly, she would lose all rights to royal protection and financial support, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions alone. The process of gathering evidence against Isabella had revealed the sophisticated nature of her deception. She had been using encrypted communication devices hidden throughout the castle, maintaining secret bank accounts in multiple countries, and coordinating with a network of agents that extended across several continents. The scope of her operation suggested years of careful planning and indicated that her betrayal was far more serious than initially suspected. Intelligence reports showed that Isabella's activities had already caused significant damage to Valdoria's national interests. Trade agreements had been sabotaged, military secrets had been compromised, and diplomatic relationships had been undermined by her deliberate interference. The full extent of her treachery was still being investigated, but it was clear that her actions had weakened the kingdom's position in international affairs and potentially compromised its security. The king's decision to act decisively was also motivated by evidence suggesting that Isabella was planning to escalate her activities in the coming weeks. Intercepted communications indicated that she was preparing to leak sensitive information about the royal family's private affairs to foreign media outlets, potentially causing irreparable damage to the monarchy's reputation. Additionally, there were concerns that she might attempt to flee the country once she realized that her activities had been discovered. Sir Reginald had explained that the legal process would be swift and final. Once Edmund signed the documents, Isabella would immediately lose her official status and could be arrested if she attempted to return to any royal property. The orders had already been prepared for distribution to all relevant security agencies, ensuring that the transition would be smooth and comprehensive. There would be no opportunity for Isabella to contest the decision or delay its implementation. The king considered the personal toll that these actions would take on his own reputation. The public had witnessed what appeared to be a loving marriage, and the revelation of Isabella's betrayal would inevitably raise questions about Edmund's judgment and leadership. Some would wonder how he could have been so thoroughly deceived, while others might question whether there were signs he should have recognized earlier. However, Edmund understood that personal considerations had to be secondary to his duty as monarch. The crown represented something larger than any individual, and protecting that institution was his primary responsibility. Isabella's betrayal was a wound that would heal with time, but allowing her to continue her subversive activities would cause permanent damage to the kingdom and its people. As he prepared to sign the documents, Edmund reflected on the broader implications of Isabella's treachery. Her actions represented not just a personal betrayal, but an attack on the democratic principles and constitutional monarchy that Valdoria had spent centuries developing. By working to undermine these institutions from within, she had threatened the stability and security that generations of Valdorians had fought to establish and maintain. The king took a deep breath and reached for his pen, knowing that this single action would change the course of his reign and potentially reshape the future of the monarchy. The documents before him represented justice, security, and the triumph of duty over personal feelings. With steady hands and a heavy heart, Edmund began to sign the papers that would strip Isabella of everything she had gained through her marriage to him, setting in motion a chain of events that would expose her treachery to the world. The golden pen felt impossibly heavy in King Edmund's hand as he methodically signed each document, his signature carrying the full weight of royal authority and finalizing Isabella's fall from grace. Each stroke of ink represented another severed connection between the woman he had loved and the crown she had betrayed. The silence in the study was broken only by the scratching of the pen and the steady tick of the grandfather clock that had marked time for generations of Valdorian monarchs. Lord Ashworth witnessed each signature with the gravity befitting such a momentous occasion, knowing that these documents would be studied by historians and legal scholars for generations to come. The formal language of the papers could not capture the human drama unfolding in the castle's ancient walls, where love had been transformed into betrayal and trust had given way to the cold necessities of statecraft. As Edmund signed the final document, he realized that he was not just stripping Isabella of her privileges, but effectively erasing 15 years of shared history from the official record. Their wedding photos would be archived, their joint public appearances would be contextualized as dissection, and their apparent partnership and service to Valdoria would be revealed as an elaborate charade orchestrated by a woman who had never truly embraced her adopted homeland. The comprehensive nature of the sanctions against Isabella reflected the severity of her crimes and the determination of the crown to send a clear message about the consequences of betraying the trust placed in members of the royal family. She would lose not only her titles and ceremonial positions, but also her residence rights, her security detail, her official transportation, and her access to the royal treasury. Most importantly, she would be stripped of the immunity from prosecution that her position had provided. Sir Reginald had already begun coordinating with law enforcement agencies to ensure that Isabella could be taken into custody the moment she returned to Valdoria. The evidence against her was sufficient to support charges of treason, espionage, and financial fraud, crimes that carried severe penalties under Valdorian law. Her diplomatic immunity, derived from her marriage to the king, would be revoked immediately upon the signing of the final documents. The intelligence services had been monitoring Isabella's communications throughout the night, providing real-time updates on her activities and whereabouts. She remained in the capital, apparently unaware that her network had been compromised and that her carefully constructed double life was about to be exposed. The surveillance teams reported that she was proceeding with her normal routine, attending meetings and maintaining contact with her co-conspirators. Edmund wondered whether Isabella had ever truly loved him, or whether their entire relationship had been nothing more than an elaborate intelligence operation designed to gain access to the highest levels of Valdorian government. The evidence suggested that her romantic pursuit of him had been deliberate and calculated, timed to coincide with the death of his first wife and his emotional vulnerability during the mourning period. The psychological profile prepared by the Royal Security Service painted a picture of Isabella as a sophisticated operative trained in the arts of deception and manipulation. Her background, which had seemed so appropriate for a future queen consort, now appeared to be a carefully constructed cover identity designed to provide her with the credentials necessary to infiltrate the royal family. Even her charity work and public advocacy had been tools in service of her larger mission. The king reflected on the countless state secrets that Isabella had been privy to during their marriage, from military strategies and diplomatic negotiations to economic policies and intelligence assessments. The damage assessment prepared by the security services suggested that virtually every aspect of Valdoria's national security had been compromised to some degree by her systematic intelligence gathering and reporting to foreign powers. Lord Ashworth approached the desk and carefully gathered the signed documents, ensuring that each page was properly witnessed and sealed before being secured in the royal safe. These papers would remain classified for security reasons, but their effects would be immediately apparent to anyone observing the royal household and its operations. Isabella's name would be quietly removed from official schedules, her portraits would disappear from public spaces, and her staff would be reassigned to other duties. The practical implications of Isabella's removal extended far beyond the legal and ceremonial aspects of her punishment. The royal household would need to be restructured to eliminate positions that had been created specifically for her. Charitable organizations would need to find new patrons to replace her support, and diplomatic relationships would need to be rebuilt on foundations untainted by her deception. Edmund understood that the public announcement of Isabella's disgrace would need to be carefully managed to minimize damage to the monarchy's reputation while ensuring that the citizens of Valdoria understood the gravity of her crimes. The royal communications team had been working on a strategy that would present the facts clearly while emphasizing the crown's commitment to transparency and justice. The king also knew that Isabella's network of co-conspirators would need to be neutralized quickly to prevent them from destroying evidence or fleeing the country. The intelligence services had identified several key figures in her organization, including officials in the foreign ministry, military officers, and business leaders who had facilitated her operations. Coordinated arrests would begin within hours of Isabella's own detention. As the signed documents were secured and the immediate legal processes set in motion, Edmund felt a complex mixture of relief, sadness, and determination. The woman who had shared his bed and his throne had betrayed everything they had supposedly built together. But her removal would allow the monarchy to begin healing from the wounds she had inflicted. The crown would survive this crisis, as it had survived countless others throughout Valdoria's long and turbulent history. The king walked to his private balcony and looked out over the kingdom he had sworn to protect, knowing that the difficult work of rebuilding trust and security was just beginning. Isabella's betrayal had shaken the foundations of the monarchy, but it had also demonstrated the resilience of Valdoria's institutions and the unwavering commitment of those who served the crown with genuine loyalty and honor. The early morning mist clung to the cobblestones of Valdoria's capital as Queen Consort Isabella's black sedan glided through the nearly empty streets, her driver navigating the familiar route back to Ravenshollow Castle with practiced ease. Isabella sat in the rear seat, reviewing documents on her encrypted tablet and mentally preparing for another day of maintaining the careful balance between her public duties and her clandestine activities. She had no idea that her world was about to collapse around her with devastating swiftness. The charity gala the previous evening had been the perfect cover for her most important meeting yet with her foreign handlers, during which she had delivered critical intelligence about Valdoria's upcoming trade negotiations with neighboring kingdoms. The information she had provided would allow her sponsors to position themselves advantageously in the complex web of international commerce, potentially earning them millions while weakening Valdoria's economic position.
Isabella felt a familiar surge of satisfaction at having successfully deceived everyone around her for so many years.
The naive trust that King Edmund placed in her had made her mission almost too easy, and the adoration of the Valdorian people had provided her with the perfect protective cover. She had become so skilled at playing her role that sometimes she almost forgot that her entire life was an elaborate performance designed to serve interests that had nothing to do with the kingdom she pretended to love. As the sedan approached the castle gates, Isabella noticed an unusual number of security personnel stationed at various checkpoints, but she attributed this to routine protocol adjustments rather than any specific threat to her position. The guards waved her through with their usual respectful acknowledgments, giving no indication that they had received orders to detain her upon her return. The castle's main courtyard was eerily quiet as Isabella's car came to a stop near the royal entrance. She gathered her belongings and stepped out onto the stone steps, breathing in the crisp morning air and mentally reviewing her schedule for the day. She had several meetings planned with charity representatives, a luncheon with the wives of foreign ambassadors, and an evening reception for visiting dignitaries from the eastern provinces. Lord Ashworth emerged from the castle's main entrance, flanked by 2 security officers, his expression unusually grave and formal. Isabella's first instinct was to assume that some minor crisis had arisen requiring her immediate attention, as such situations were not uncommon in the complex world of royal protocol and diplomatic relations. She approached him with her characteristic grace and composure, prepared to address whatever issue had developed during her absence. The moment Lord Ashworth spoke, however, Isabella realized that her carefully constructed world was crumbling. His words were precise and formal, informing her that by order of His Majesty King Edmund, she was hereby stripped of all royal privileges and titles effective immediately. The charges against her included treason, espionage, and violation of her oath of loyalty to the crown and the people of Valdoria. Isabella's mind raced as she processed the implications of Lord Ashworth's announcement, her years of training in deception and crisis management failing her in this moment of ultimate exposure. She attempted to maintain her composure while frantically calculating potential escape routes and damage control strategies, but the presence of additional security personnel throughout the courtyard made it clear that her options were severely limited. The formal reading of the charges took several minutes, during which Isabella stood frozen on the castle steps as the full scope of the evidence against her was revealed. The investigators had uncovered her financial connections to foreign intelligence services, documented her communications with subversive elements within Valdoria, and traced her systematic betrayal of state secrets stretching back to the earliest days of her marriage to Edmund. As Lord Ashworth concluded his formal statement, Isabella was informed that she had 10 minutes to collect essential personal items under supervision before being escorted from the premises. Her access to royal residences, vehicles, and communication systems was terminated immediately, and she would no longer be entitled to security protection or diplomatic immunity. The transformation from queen consort to accused traitor was swift and absolute. Isabella's attempt to demand an audience with King Edmund was firmly denied, as Lord Ashworth explained that His Majesty had no intention of meeting with someone who had so thoroughly violated his trust and betrayed her sworn duties. The signed documents authorizing her removal had been properly executed according to Valdorian law, and there would be no opportunity for negotiation or appeal within the royal household. The escort to her former chambers was conducted with professional efficiency but unmistakable firmness, as security personnel accompanied Isabella through corridors that had been her domain for 15 years. Servants and staff members watched in stunned silence as the woman who had wielded such influence and commanded such respect was reduced to the status of a suspected criminal facing expulsion from the castle. Isabella's personal belongings had already been searched and catalogued by investigators, with many items being retained as potential evidence in the criminal case being prepared against her. She was permitted to take only basic clothing and personal effects, while her jewelry, electronic devices, and official papers were confiscated as part of the ongoing investigation into her activities. The final humiliation came as Isabella was escorted to the castle's service entrance, rather than the grand main doors through which she had passed countless times as queen consort. The symbolism was deliberate and unmistakable, marking her transition from a figure of honor and respect to someone whose presence was no longer welcome in the seat of Valdorian power. As Isabella was placed in an unmarked security vehicle for transport to a detention facility pending her trial, she caught a glimpse of King Edmund watching from a high window in the castle's east tower. Their eyes met for a brief moment across the courtyard, and she saw in his expression not anger or hatred, but a profound sadness that somehow cut deeper than any harsh words or dramatic confrontation could have done. The vehicle pulled away from Ravenshallow Castle as the morning sun finally broke through the mist, casting long shadows across the grounds where Isabella had walked as royalty for the last time. Behind her lay 15 years of deception and betrayal, while ahead waited the consequences of choices that had seemed so calculated and advantageous when she made them, but now appeared to be the instruments of her own destruction. Episode About history. 6 months after Isabella's dramatic downfall, King Edmund stood in the renovated east wing of Ravenshallow Castle, surveying the changes that had transformed the space once dominated by his former queen consort's presence. The rooms that had housed her offices, private quarters, and meeting spaces had been completely reimagined, their new purpose as a center for diplomatic training and international relations serving as a symbol of the monarchy's commitment to genuine service, rather than personal ambition. The trial of Isabella and her co-conspirators had captivated the nation and international observers, revealing the full extent of the network that had operated within Valdoria's borders for years. Her conviction on charges of high treason, espionage, and financial fraud had resulted in a life sentence that she was now serving in the kingdom's most secure correctional facility. Her dreams of power and influence replaced by the stark reality of permanent imprisonment. The investigation that followed Isabella's arrest had uncovered a web of corruption that reached far beyond the royal household, implicating dozens of officials, military officers, and business leaders who had been compromised by foreign intelligence services. The comprehensive reforms that resulted from these revelations had strengthened Valdoria's security apparatus while also improving transparency and accountability throughout the government. King Edmund had emerged from the crisis with his reputation not only intact, but actually enhanced by his decisive response to the threat posed by Isabella's betrayal. The public's initial shock at the revelations had quickly transformed into admiration for a monarch who had placed duty to country above personal feelings, even when it meant exposing himself to public embarrassment and emotional pain. The new security protocols implemented throughout the royal household had created multiple layers of protection against future infiltration attempts, while still maintaining the accessibility and openness that had always characterized the Valdorian monarchy. Background investigations had been intensified, communication systems had been upgraded, and a new position of security liaison had been created to coordinate between the royal household and intelligence agencies. The diplomatic consequences of Isabella's exposure had initially caused tension with several neighboring kingdoms, but the transparent handling of the crisis had ultimately strengthened Valdoria's international relationships. Foreign governments had expressed respect for Edmund's willingness to confront corruption within his own household, viewing it as evidence of the kingdom's commitment to honest and reliable partnerships. The charitable organizations that Isabella had used as fronts for her intelligence operations had been thoroughly investigated and reformed, with new leadership and oversight structures ensuring that their legitimate humanitarian work could continue without the taint of her deception. Many of these organizations had actually flourished under their new management, freed from the hidden agendas that had previously constrained their effectiveness. Edmund had chosen not to remarry, dedicating himself instead to the duties of kingship with a renewed sense of purpose and clarity. The painful lesson of Isabella's betrayal had taught him valuable insights about trust, judgment, and the responsibilities that came with his position, making him a more effective and thoughtful leader despite the personal cost of the experience. The former Queen Consort's quarters had been converted into a museum dedicated to the history of Valdorian democracy and constitutional monarchy, with exhibits highlighting the importance of transparency, accountability, and public service in maintaining the trust between rulers and citizens. The irony was not lost on visitors that the woman who had tried to destroy these institutions had ultimately provided a powerful demonstration of their strength and resilience. Lord Ashworth had been promoted to a new position as Special Advisor for Internal Security, his crucial role in exposing Isabella's treachery having earned him the king's complete confidence and the gratitude of the entire kingdom. His methodical investigation and careful documentation had provided the foundation for the successful prosecutions that followed, while his discretion and professionalism had helped minimize the crisis's impact on public confidence. The intelligence services had used the lessons learned from Isabella's case to develop new methodologies for identifying and neutralizing insider threats, sharing their expertise with allied nations facing similar challenges. The comprehensive nature of her deception had actually provided valuable insights into the techniques used by foreign intelligence services, making Valdoria's security apparatus more effective than ever before. King Edmund often reflected on the complex emotions surrounding Isabella's downfall, acknowledging that despite her crimes, she had been a skilled operator who had successfully deceived some of the most experienced and knowledgeable people in the kingdom. Her failure had ultimately resulted not from incompetence but from the inherent contradiction between the sustained deception required for long-term espionage and the genuine relationships that effective leadership demanded. The royal household had developed new traditions and protocols designed to strengthen the bonds between the monarchy and the people it served, with increased public access to castle tours, expanded community outreach programs, and regular forums for citizen input on policy matters. These changes reflected Edmund's determination to ensure that future threats to the crown would be detected by a more engaged and informed populace. As Edmund prepared for the evening state dinner honoring visiting dignitaries from across the continent, he paused to look out the window at the gardens where he had once walked with Isabella, believing that they shared common goals and values. The painful memory had been transformed by time and perspective, into a source of wisdom rather than regret, reminding him daily of the vigilance required to protect the institutions and principles that defined Valdorian civilization. The king smiled as he straightened his formal uniform and prepared to join his guests, knowing that the challenges ahead would be met with the hard-won knowledge that duty, honor, and genuine service to others provided a stronger foundation for leadership than any amount of personal charm or political calculation. Isabella's betrayal had wounded him deeply, but it had also revealed the true strength of the crown and the enduring loyalty of those who served it with authentic dedication to the common good.